All right, guys. Anthony with Austin Stockholm Skills here again at Vigilante, our new home away from home in Austin. Tonight we're talking about Cloak, especially working off of Meyer's Rappier, which is Meyer's side sword. Quick notes about that before we dig into things. Even though it's generally called Rappier or Rappier, if you want to be fancy about it, it's definitely a much shorter weapon. Key notes about Meyer's side sword, Meyer's Rappier, is it has this knuckle bow protecting the front of the hand. Also has this ring guard protecting against cuts. So it's a slightly more complex hilt than we're used to for Meyer, at least, but it is definitely a much shorter weapon than a traditional rapier. As you can see, here's a traditional rapier, 45 inches on the long side, but this side sword coming in 37, 8, 9 inches or so is, well, they're 45-inch blade, that is, and this is 38, 39 overall. So you can see much shorter weapon, much different mindset than an actual traditional rapier that we think of. So we're going to think of it as Meyer's side sword, even though we call it a rapier. So with that in mind, a few things about Cloak, playing with Cloak, learning to do this. First of all, definitely treat it as it's kind of, especially with side sword, the exotic fun weapon that it really is. There's not a lot. We have in Hema, at least, that you get to play with those a lot. Sometimes you get some open events where you get to pick a offhand item with your single sword, and Cloak tends to be an option. But last event I saw, there were 2 or 3 people fighting with cloaks in a pool of maybe 30. So not a big thing, not a lot to do with it. As far as cloaks go, I don't have a fancy cloak for this. I've got a couple option simulators to kind of talk about and play with, how they work, why they do, don't work, and this will apply to following videos as well. Most obvious one is something like a jacket. I've got a hoodie here. I did kind of tuck the sleeves in to make it a little bit more streamlined for throwing, but something like this is a good weight, a good size for being able to sit here and do some of the throwing motions, things like that we associate with those cloak plays, but really able to quickly and easily disengage. You can kind of grab the hood instead of the collar, as it were. Just gives you a little bit more material to play with, a little more length to it. You can see at this stat at on my shoulder. This is actually a pretty good length for a cloak. You may be sure a little bit longer, but if you have something without that hood and just getting something at waist length, this is far too short to be used effectively for a cloak. So I'll kind of go through the play cycle tonight, kind of with both items. I got my hoodie to one side. The other option I have is honestly a scrap of fabric I found lying around the house. So still not great cloak material, but it definitely does just kind of match and fit and fall under the general use, right? So kind of fold this in half a little bit. Still maybe scrap from fabric, but you can kind of see something like this. So here, again, all you really need is something in this nicer flannel. You can go like a craft store of your choice and make your own cheap cloak like this. It's just flannel cut to a length, nothing else. But again, you want something probably shoulder length to knee if you want to get super fancy. I do have a much longer, larger cloak, double layered linen. Not effective at all for sword fighting. Way too much weight, way too much body for that. So that's definitely something to kind of keep in the back of your head of if you are going to start trying to play with cloak, you need something that's heavy enough to be effective, be useful, to be thrown nicely, but not so heavy that you literally can't throw it or there's just too much mass to move around. So real quick, so talking about Meyer's stuff tonight, he has 2 really simple plays that kind of highlight how he treats it. He does call it emergency weapon for your offhand, so it's definitely not something he says is going to be a primary tool or primary use. And the first thing he says to do is really get used to being able to wrap the cloak quickly. So he says you grab it by the collar, and he just kind of shows it flipped over the arm, and it kind of becomes this offhand pairing device here, right? I'm not stopping cuts with it, I'm not taking strikes with it, but I'm using this to help control, help move, help engage against my opponent. So again, whether it starts off and free, he goes through his, If you have it up your collar, it says grab it from here, flip it out, and then wrap. And honestly, if you're treating this like a mushroom, if you do want to be able to quickly disrobe your jacket or your cloak and practice that motion, practice this idea of, okay, I'm wearing whatever I have, I get it off and quickly wrap and try to get something covering them. So like this is no good. I've not protected myself at all. Just have a whole bunch of cloth doing nothing useful, which is why getting efficient with this movement, getting practice with it is important. That's what Meyer says opening up. Like if you can't quickly wrap and protect your arm with your cloak, it's just going to get you in the way. So really, if it's something you want to get into, practice that movement. Practice being able to quickly grab it from your shoulder, even if you just have it loosely down on the ground, being able to quickly wrap it through. And that's going to matter as well. And we get to the later plays of being able to change how the option is being used. So technique one, with Meyer, he's assumed we've got our cloak and it's nicely wrapped over our forearm. So again, you see forearm is nicely covered. Hands are back here somewhere. You really can't see what's going on. But I'm never engaging my arm to the weapon. I'm not sitting here taking strikes for this. I'm not here getting stabbed in it. Meyer says very explicitly that when you're doing this, if they cut at you, bind with your sword and quickly drive through to the cloak. Because these are not lightsabers you're playing with. They're just sharp weapons, sharp implements. I can make this bind, control, stop their weapon, transition over, wrap, control, whatever else I need to as I quickly go around and strike. So this is very similar to a lot of stuff we talk about in Sword and Buckler, right? Where I'm not using my buckler as a shield to hide behind to catch the other person's attack. I'm using it as a transition point. So I catch with my sword, I drive in, and I control and I wrap whatever else needs to happen. As promised, just for the entertainment, doing the same thing with my hoodie, right? Same thing. So we've got hoodie here, off the shoulder. I pull it down by the collar, wrap it, flip it over, get a nice tight bundle as much as this can, where I've got this nice protection from slicing from as much of my forearm as I can cover. Same principle can apply though. I'm working, cut comes in, I cut, control, however else, and I quickly charge in, wrapping up, protecting myself and controlling their weapon, right? So very much this idea that once I can get this nicely wrapped, control the weapon, receive a cut, driving through, coming off. The other play that Meyer talks about is kind of a, throw is not the right word because he keeps control of the cloak, but kind of trying to capture and wrap and attacking around the sword as it comes in. So this is, again, against a cut, and this is when I am sitting here holding it loose by the collar, right? So it's long and draping. I want to be able to throw across and entangle and grab and snare. And notice you don't really, right? It's going to have momentum. It's going to wrap you up. So make sure that when you're doing this, you're able to move around and not get trapped in your own weapon. So, but he's talking about throwing this against and coming around the other side with your sword. So it's really about the attack comes in, catch, strike. So against the pedal, being able to catch and strike, coming around and controlling. So again, they throw their attack, meet it with your cloak instead of your sword, and wrapping around. So you can see really quickly that if you're able to start in this relaxed position here and quickly wrap this up, you have a lot more options, a little bit less telegraphing what's going to happen, whether you throw the cloak across and strike, or whether if you're going to try to meet the sword and come in and work from there. Having that ability to kind of wrap and unwrap quickly is what's really going to change what you're able to do. Just keeping your, granted, fairly limited options, slightly more open, slightly more to play with and work with. So same thing with the scrap of fabric. Again, a little bit longer than my hoodie was. From about shoulder down the ankles. So I have it nice and loose, bunched here. as I throw this across, just really working on getting that secondary attack. So coming through and immediately diving after. So important things to note. If you are looking or intending to be using a cloak, if you're intending to try to make this something you want to play with and do, these motions have to be so rehearsed, so practiced that it needs to flow into one motion. I can't sit here, throw my cloak, cool, I got it, stepping around. This attack needs to move immediately. It needs to come in a 1.5 tempos, right? I can't go, okay, and through, because notice, right? If this is a real person, they're not going to sit there and let me just tie this up and wait for me to do something. You need to be giving them a target, maybe start your own cut, fall through, working like that, and just really making sure this motion starts to become automatic. And as soon as this goes out, you're moving behind it. You need to just come around, driving through. Same thing is applying to that first technique. I've got that nice wrap. As soon as I feel this bind, I'm going to be pressing out with that cloak arm, pressing down, trying to wrap, trying to control. And once I have this, right, all bets are off. Whether I pull, whether I try to grab, whether I try to wrap, whether I try to do something like this, it's whatever is showing up, whatever becomes an option. But just getting used to the idea that as they throw their cut, as you countercut against it, you're almost immediately falling under with that cloak. As soon as you make this contact, driving with the cloak, whatever else comes from there, you kind of just work with and play with. One last interesting tidbit, just because they're side by side in Meyer's book, this same technique is how he describes a side sword dealing with cuts from a spear or partisan or something large, right? You make contact with the weapon with your sword, whether it's a sword so you can drive in your cloak, whether it's the haft of a partisan or spear, press out here, and you're immediately diving in with your free hand, trying to control and just making these options. So as silly as this kind of feels playing with Cloak, there definitely is carry over to other weapons, other ideas. If you played with the Dusak stuff, this same principle comes in from the bow parry, where you can step through and wrap and strike. So this concept that we see with the Cloak of using our offhand and being able to drive in and control isn't unique to this weapon, and it's something Meyer highlights a lot. And it's just really taking this application of I can protect this hand now, so I can use this to isolate and control their weapon. And that's really a feature we see a lot in a lot of Meyer's work. So hope this is a fun, interesting change of pace. Next week, we're going to start into some of the Fabrics Cloak work and see how that pans out. Wish I could pretend I'm going to have a fancier cloak by then, but it's probably not going to happen. But as always, guys, if there are comments, questions, or more things you really hate Cloak you'd like to see, definitely reach out, email, comment below, Facebook, YouTube, anything like that. Otherwise, hope everyone's staying safe. Have a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday when we start our dive into Jude Liu and looking at some of the original longsword stuff. Thanks.